morning. Now let's do it again. Good morning. What a glorious day it is, and what a glorious weekend it has been, and how special it has been to have each of you back on campus. And now, as we conclude our time together, to come together in this historic Great Chapel, where many of you gathered so many times as students for Convocation, for chapel, for concerts, and for other activities. And today, to hear for the first time the full majesty of the restored Keller Plyce organ. Special thanks to Al Cook for his music. Let's show our appreciation. And it's on display in the library. Will be available for display again from 11:30 to 1. Is that the correct time? And so if you have not yet taken time to see that, I hope that you will, because it's a wonderful collection that will surface memories long forgotten, as well as perhaps affirm some memories that have been remembered through the ages. And special thanks to those from the class who have worked so hard to gather this and to make this collection available to us. It is good to come together on this glorious day when the beauty of the world around us reminds us of the goodness and the creative power of our God to share in this time of worship. And so as we begin this time in this sacred place, let us join with one another in a spirit of prayer. Holy God, we give you thanks for the gift of life, for the creation that you have brought into being, and for the creative power that you have given to the human beings who have been made in your image. For the ways in which that power is reflected in the intellect of the mind, in the passion of the heart, and in the giving of the hand. The ways in which those creative powers are expressed in the pursuit of knowledge, the development of relationships in the undergraduate years that shape us for the future and that indeed nourish us for a lifetime. And as we have gathered this weekend, we're grateful to be reminded of the impact of those relationships and of that time here. We're grateful to know that that mission which you provided for this institution as long ago as 1842 continues to thrive today as a part of your grand purpose for this world that you have created. So as we gather in this chapel this morning, we pray for the presence of your Spirit as our guide and as our friend. And as we prepare to depart from this chapel and once again from this campus, may you lead us back into the world for the leadership and service for which each of us was created and for which Ohio Wesleyan helped prepare us. We pray in the name that is above all names. Amen.
How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is the sea, vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small. There the ships go to and fro, and Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there. All creatures look to you to give them their food in the proper time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are satisfied with good things. When you hide your face, they are terrified. When you take away their breath, they die and return to dust. When you send your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He who looks at the earth, and it trembles, who touches the mountains, and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord all of my life. I will sing praises to my God as long as I live. May my meditations be pleasing to him as I rejoice in the Lord.
Rather, it is God, living in me, who is doing divine work. Believe me when I say that I am God and God is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to God. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so God may be glorified in me. You may ask for anything in my name, and I will do it. If you love me, keep my commands, and I will ask God, and you will be given another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept God because it neither sees God nor knows God, but you know, for God lives with you and will be in you. All this I have spoken while still with you. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom God will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid.
Oh of our time together. It reminds me of the way the students look at commencement. And we tell them, commence, this is the beginning of your life. No, this is the end of our college. We have to throw off their mortar boards and they're all finished, but it's a beginning. And for us, our convocation, our coming together, is a kind of final convocation this weekend. President Jones began with an invocation, an in-calling. A revocation is what they might do to us if they knew what we really had done 50 years ago around here of our diplomas. Might be a revocation. And I was listening this morning to the story that if it's true, I'm wondering if some of that mischievous class of 63 was up to Trumbull overnight. I heard all the power went off in the president's house. And it's Stuyvesant Hall. All right, fess up. 63, were you doing that? You know, yesterday a lot of nice things were said about a lot of people. Certainly I had far more nice things said about me than I deserved. It was a day where one had to remember a certain kind of humility and modesty, and it's a time when I remember something that happened to me in my last position when I was at Clark University, and it was one day kind of during orientation, and we had some flooding in the neighborhood, and our basement was kind of muddy, and there were actually a couple of rats we had to get rid of, and I was down there in the basement kind of, you know, bucketing out some mucky water, and so I walked out, had this dirty t-shirt on, blue jeans, probably only blue jeans, and went out to the tap on the side of the house to fill a bucket of water. And I noticed there were two women walking up the street, one quite young, probably an incoming freshman, the other very likely the mother. And the mother said to the daughter, now Marilyn, you do know why we're paying for you to go to this wonderful college. And Marilyn said, well, yes, I'm here to get a good education, to learn how to think, and so I can get a career. And the mother looked at her and said, no, you're here in college so you don't end up like him. It's always good to keep your place. Remember your place. It reminded me of one other story told me recently that comes out of Chicago, and I'm told it used to be told out of Texas, so I think it's a bipartisan story. The story is that these 10 men went on a hunting trip up into Canada, from Chicago up into Canada. And it was a terrible tragedy. The bus, they were all together on a bus, and it had an accident, and all 10 of them were killed. And quite tragic. And about 2 weeks later, the widow of one of the 10 went up to this small village in Ontario where the accident had taken place, and went to the sheriff's office in the jail there, and said, well, I know my husband was killed with those people, but is there any chance that they're survived on that bus, a small monkey? And the sheriff said, well, that's funny that you're asking, because actually we were going to get rid of it. We've kept it the last 2 weeks, but he is in the back. So the sheriff went, got the monkey, brought him out, and she said, oh, Bonzo, I'm so happy that you survived. Bonzo, tell me, what were those men doing on that bus? Bonzo, were they drinking? Bonzo, what else were they doing on that bus? Bonzo, were they dancing? Bonzo, what else were they doing on that bus? Bonzo, were they smooching? Bonzo, all this time, what were you doing on that bus? It all depends on who's driving the bus. Who's the leader? Who's the leader? Well, I thought we'd spend a few minutes today looking at the concept of servant leadership. If you listen carefully to the opening hymn, there's a line in there that's very interesting about us being servants to the servant, not servants to the king, not servants to the lord, not servants to the earl or to the duke. The notion of servant leadership, usually the phrase, is attributed to a man named Robert Greenleaf, who was an executive at AT&T in around 1970, was looking for a different model of leadership at the corporate level. You know, something that it wasn't military, it wasn't autocratic, it wasn't really corporate in the traditional sense, focused more on the progress of the organization, than on the individual's career. And he developed this idea, wrote a whole book about it actually. But of course it's been traced back to ancient times to the Asian philosopher Lao Tzu. And of course it's often tied to Jesus. You remember the Jesus disciples were always asking, who's going to sit at your right hand when we're in the kingdom? Who's going to be number one? Who's going to be next to you? And, Jesus would kind of defer those kind of questions. And according to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus said, you all, you've heard it among you, that among the Gentiles, those that are powerful will lord it over the people, and those that are great exercise their authority over them. So shall it not be with you. Those of you that are going to have power will be ministers to all. And those of you who would be chiefest will be servants to all. And so they're out there screaming for a king, screaming for a boss. Reminds you of the Israelites at the time of the judges that said, give us a king, we need a king. And they got Saul. And David followed, and Solomon followed, and it all fell apart after that. Babylonian captivity. And Jesus says, no. He's going to be chief among you, is going to wash your feet. He's going to be, whoever is chief among you is going to be a servant. And they didn't know what to do with that, actually. It's a little bit like that very strange book in the New Testament, the letter to the Hebrews. I don't know whether Paul really wrote that one or not. And it's a strange book in a way, but occasionally you get that message. Things are different. Jesus' message is different from what it used to be. This isn't a model of kingship. This is a model of leadership that talks about being a servant. Even Paul, and Paul who can be so terrible at times, I mean really, it's hard to like Paul, but he can rise to heights. You know, like in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says nothing's quite like that. Or some of those sections of Galatians, where he talks about, no longer will there be Jew or Greek. No longer will there be slave or free. We didn't do a very good job of that one, though. We, ended up with a lot of anti-Semitism, a little slavery, but Paul said it well, and really picking up on a very important part of Jesus' message. So what can we find in this model of servant leadership that might explain some of the success that my classmates and many Ohio Wesleyan graduates have had, that might have been tied to their education here, and what in it do we want to pass on to the president to say, this should be in the future education of all of our students at Ohio Wesleyan? There's an irony here, because what we're really saying is the model of leadership we're talking about is one that submerges the leader into the larger whole, into the larger organization. The further irony, your greatest legacy as a leader may come from things that you've let other people take the credit for. That you have found people in place that can play leadership roles, that can make your organization a success, and it'll be your legacy. And only later on, people say, oh, that happened when Ron Jones was president here. Yes, and all of those wonderful things happen. So there are ironies here. And the other part of it, of course, is the leader can never avoid the tough decisions that he or she has to be the one to make. That's the time you don't pass the buck, is when finally the decision does come back to you. Last weekend, I had the pleasure at my own university of having former Ohio Wesleyan President David Warren as the speaker. And David gave a wonderful talk, and he talked really about those, what he calls boundary decisions that people make in the course of their life that determine their legacy, determine their identity. And he looked out at the students and said, you all will make some boundary decisions in your life, whatever they may be. And he called on Harry Truman for some of his examples. And he said at one point, late in his life, Harry Truman was interviewed about what he thought about his career. And he talked about the difficulty of making those boundary decisions. And he talked about three of them. And they were tough ones. And they may not have been right ones, or they may have been. The decision to drop the bombs on Japan. Controversial still today. Was it the right decision? He said he labored over it anxiously. What would save more lives, continuing the war, dropping the bombs. But he finally made the decision. Secondly, the decision to integrate the armed forces. Decision to integrate the armed forces. Now you've got to realize that Harry Truman became the lowest ranked president in popularity in American history. At one point his popularity rating was 28%. Nobody has quite gone that low, and yet he made a decision. He said, we've had too much injustice too long for people that have given their lives for this country, and made the decision to integrate the armed forces. And the third one was fire deficit further. You know, your great American, perhaps other than Dwight Eisenhower, the most famous, the most gloried American leader of World War II. But he said, civilian control over the military depends on this, and made that decision. And, you know, when he thought about, you know, why did you make those decisions? And he said, you know, when it was all said and done, the next morning of each time, I had to look in the mirror, and the one person I was satisfied was the face in the mirror. And if I could look in there and say, you know, I've done the best that I could do, I could live with myself. And living with myself is most important. But we can find so many other examples in American history beyond Harry Truman. I mean, after reading Ron Cherno's biography of George Washington, you know, Washington's a strange figure in a way. He never went to college, was always self-conscious about that, not intellectual, not really a terribly great military general. He lost most of the battles he got in a way. He had a tremendous ability to survive. He had an amazing political instinct. He always knew what to do to survive and to keep the cause going. And the more I think about those early years in American history, George Washington may be the one irreplaceable person that America could get started and survive to the Civil War. Dr. Smith may disagree with me, I don't know. But anybody trying to put together Alexander Hamilton and John Jefferson and John Adams and some of that crew that hated each other so much, but all had such genius to bring to the country and to bring it for a whole. People, you know, thought, gee, everybody loved George Washington. Ooh, the vilification that a lot of the political figures in America brought to him. It's hard to match in some ways today, though we do a good job of matching it. R.A. Lincoln, you think about Lincoln's life, and you think about it, and he could be as politically spy, we all know, as anybody, but how he made certain decisions. The Fort Sumter decision, the Emancipation Proclamation decision, the 13th Amendment you've all seen in the movie, made decisions that he felt honestly were good for the country. Might not be good for him politically, might not even help him continue to live, but they were good. I think more recently in the corporate world, one of the people I admired in the corporate world was Gordon Bethune, who was the CEO of Continental Airlines, and brought them back to health. And he had an opportunity at one point when he was CEO to arrange for a merger with Delta Airlines. And he turned it down, because the Continental employees would have been badly hurt by that. All the shareholders would have made a move. 5 years later, they did merge, as you know, with United Airlines. But he had a chance to make a decision that would have helped all the shareholders and hurt so many of the employees, and he didn't make it. He made what may well have been still the right decision of a different kind. Branch Rickey. Why does Branch Rickey make the decision he makes in the 40s? Well, we trace it back to Ohio Wesleyan. But it was a decision that could have backfired. He could have gotten himself assassinated, I suppose, in 1946 and 47. So much of it's a matter of timing. All of you have probably heard the story, Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, was asked, how did you get to be such a great hockey player? Well, I had a knack not for skating to where the puck was, but for where the puck was going to be. And it is a matter of timing often when you make decisions. You may not have heard the story about Ted Williams, the great hitter, who, when he coached a young hitter in baseball, said, every time you go up to the plate, there's going to be one pitch that's yours. It's not the pitcher's. When you get that pitch, don't miss it and don't foul it off. Don't foul it off. You get that time, you get that opportunity to make that decision of a certain kind. Make the right decision. One of my favorite writers on leadership issues is Jim Collins. A lot of you have read Jim Collins, to a good degree. Built to last, probably. Those institutions and organizations, and he would say universities, that have survived the best have been those true to some core values they've always had. But they've changed their practices. And he says the worst thing you can do is confuse your practices with your core values. And in fact, if you don't change practices along the way, if Ohio Wesleyan were not different in 2013 from what it was in 1963, it would not be as good as it is now. Core values versus practices there. And Jim is a wonderful speaker, if you ever have a chance to hear him speak, maybe the best speaker I've ever heard. When he gets to talk about the level 5 leadership, he's really talking about a leadership level where the ego kind of disappears there, where the CEO, the president, knows how to pick people to put in positions. Now, it doesn't work when you try to move from level 1 up to 2, 3, something like that. You may need somebody that bangs heads together and that. But when you're moving from level 4 to level 5, moving from good to great, you really cannot do it all yourself. If you actually do it all yourself, you'll fall on your face. So it's those leaders at that point, you probably haven't even heard of them because it's not their ego that's out on the front page. It's somebody else that you hear about. I was asked once upon a time to give a talk comparing how would you compare being president of a university with being president of a corporation. My lovely wife, Kate, at that point, comes out of the corporate world and said, what in the world do you know about being president of a corporation? I said, dear, it's not totally different. There are some things that are similar. I mean, you know, you count on the president understanding his industry, right? I mean, the president of the university, if he didn't know today what was happening with technology, what was happening with changing demographics, with globalism, with the MOOCs and badges, with the delivery systems, with federal regulation, what kind of president would he be? It's one person to count. President of a corporation, same thing. Ooh, I think our automobile industry learned their lesson the hard way. Nobody in America can make cars except Americans. That was a few years ago. We learned the hard way. Computer industry, the same thing. You know, unless the president is the one that has the largest vision of his industry, you're not going to succeed. Secondly, you know the organization. You know, the president of the university, Rob, is the only person in the university that everybody relates to in some way. When you think about it, every student, every faculty member, every staff member, every alum, every person downtown, everybody else that thinks he knows what's best for you. Everybody else in the university, part of it does. You may not know the strength of the individual groundskeeper as well as your director of physical plant knows, but you know generally your strengths, where you're strong, where you're weak, what needs to be done. So that's similar. Third, you set the tone. If you're the president, you set the tone. You set the tone, you make the key decisions, and the tone of the whole organization. High school principal sets the tone. University president sets the tone. Corporation CEO sets the tone. You're the communicator also, both to the outside world and the inside world. One of the hardest things for people to realize when they move into a position, even a department chair, is, you know, Sam, words out of your mouth no longer mean the same thing. When you were a professor, you could say, you know, I think we ought to get rid of that part of the department that teaches anything before 1500. Nobody cared. If you're the chair and you're overheard in the coffee shop saying that, believe me, that'll resonate, that'll reverberate. You need to prepare people, train people, so they understand that. And maybe most importantly, the president is always the one that appoints the key lieutenants that really are the ones that will deliver the key services and goods in the organization. I don't care whether it's a university or not. Now, there are differences between them. There are differences of identity. Your college is not your toothpaste. It's not your blue jeans. It's not even your automobile, no matter how much you might like your Aston Martin or whatever you love. You are part of Ohio Wesleyan. Ohio Wesleyan is part of you. You've changed Ohio Wesleyan when you went to school here. For the better, we assume. Ohio Wesleyan changed you for the better. There's an identity relationship. The student is not a customer. You may market the student, but he's not a customer. He's part of this fabric, the same way that faculty member is. Secondly, location. You know, Boeing can decide it wants to close a shop in Seattle, Washington, and move it to South Carolina. You can do that. You know, if you had a great opportunity to move Ohio Wesleyan to Portsmouth, Ohio, it wouldn't be that easy to do. I mean, assuming you wanted to do that. It's not that easy to do because we're a place. We're tied to our location. Once in a long time you hear about something moving, but very rare. And, you know, when the CEO of Gillette arranged a buyout by Procter & Gamble, that was his greatest success. I doubt that it would be the greatest success of Ohio Wesleyan if it arranged a buyout by dentistry. I mean, it doesn't work that way in the world of universities. And there are differences. Somebody said the profit. You know, profit may be a difference. But I tell you, in a university, if the expense line is bigger than the revenue line, it's just as bad. And so revenues must exceed expenses. It reminds me of that line that Mr. McCauber and David Copperfield, how does that go? You know, income 145 pounds, expenses 144 pounds, result happiness. Income 145 pounds, expenses 146 pounds, result sadness. Still, so there are differences, but they're not enormous. So how does all this end up helping us think about the people that are graduated from Ohio Wesleyan and have played leadership positions in whatever fields, in the arts, in business, in medicine, in science? We know of some of the strengths of Ohio Wesleyan education, bringing theory to practice. We use that phrase now. We didn't use it 50 years ago, but I think we wanted the same kind of thing. We wanted that connection between our education and what we call the real world. I'm not always sure it's any more real. We want people that can solve problems, can make connections between the things they're learning. One of the things that troubles me so much about our discussion today of, you know, competency-based curricula. I love if they really were competency-based. They tend to be content tests. You read some content and take a test and you're now competent. If you're competent, you can put pieces together. You can solve problems. We have to remember that. That's why students have to take ownership of their own education. You teach them psychology, teach them biology. There's English back there, there's history. No. The student's got to put pieces together because when she gets out, she has to solve problems. And out in the outside world, they don't divide things up that way. But we know those are the strengths there. We know that Ohio Wesleyan will challenge you to think. We know that Ohio Wesleyan will encourage you to grow. We know that Ohio Wesleyan will open up the world to you. Will show you parts of the world that you haven't known before. And this is all important as you move into a leadership position. It will inspire you to learn. A couple of final comments. Can we make sure that the great liberal arts colleges of America remain student-centered? It's been clear all weekend. You benefited from an institution that was very student-centered. People might have had fights over this, that, and the other, but the students got the primary attention. It's tough in today's academic world. People focused on their careers here and careers there. Those are important, don't get me wrong. But the value of an Ohio Wesleyan education is only going to be there. First of all, that it keeps attracting students who will learn from each other, and that's half learning. It should be. You go to good school. And secondly, that the students remain the center here. Secondly, something else people find hard to talk about, the moral value of a liberal arts education. Well, no, I teach chemistry. No, nothing there. No. I teach history. I was teaching history. No moral. Wait a minute, folks. Wait a minute. Everything we teach has moral and ethical dimensions. And it's a mistake. We don't think it does. I mean, you're trying to teach a theology course here. It means those are part of the faculty. In fact, one of the hardest things I find for young and old faculty both to realize is they want to think it's the content they teach the students that they've really made a difference in. In fact, my golly, well, if they've inspired the student to learn, they have. But you know what? The students will remember much longer than the content, who you were. You as a role model. Now, this is even more important where I am now, where our students grow up not knowing, you know, the parents don't know if physicians or attorneys or business leaders or anything, but it's true everywhere. How did the person talk? How did he dress? How did he behave? What were his values? What were her values? The professor is always a role model for the student. And it's good for us to remember that. And it's also good for us to remember there are moral issues in everything that we learn. And also that we're always part of something larger. You know, the interesting thing is that the university, any organization, a corporation, will only thrive so long as each of its students, each of its employees, whoever's involved, has the opportunity and encouragement to fulfill herself, to fulfill himself to their highest potential. And each employee and each student will only truly fulfill himself or herself to their maximum potential if their institution their university, their corporation, can thrive to its highest potential. It's kind of a paradox there, but it may bring us back at the end to that model we heard about in the hymn. Can we be a servant to servants? Not a servant to a master, a servant to servants. And a model of servant leadership that goes back to ancient times that may provide us a way of understanding how an organization reaches its fullest achievement, and how each individual, each student, each employee, each faculty member, each staff member also reaches his or her fullest potential. And so, as Jesus said, you know, if you're really going to be first longest and be chiefest, you'll wash your feet. You'll be a servant. You'll be a minister to what we need. So let's remember that as we move forward from our wonderful weekend here at Ohio Wesleyan. And as we keep an eye on Ohio Wesleyan, and we know that it's going to continue to make it possible for all of its students to reach their fullest potential. And in that, it will reach its fullest potential.
this morning, we have been reminded again of the call to servant leadership. So as you leave this place today, go forth to serve God and your neighbor in all that you do. And may those to whom love is a stranger find in you a generous friend. And may the God who created you, who redeems you, and who day by day sustains you, go with you now and forever. Amen. Please be seated for the postscript.